we'll start with the roll call.
Okay, so Chair Rocha's not here, so he's excused. Vice Chair Kennedy.
Here.
Mike Fan.
Here.
Arnold Urias.
Here.
Randy Goodman will not be here. Luther Kraxberger.
Here.
And Anthony Teeters will not be here either, but we do have a quorum of 4 out of the 7.
Okay. Moving on to the approval of minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review those? Can I get a motion?
So moved.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. And next, we are going to pause on the water, right? Until,
So we can kind of talk about it a little bit. Has everybody had a chance to review the 2016 water policy by chance? Okay, so in the 2016 water policy, which are water.
I'm cheating though because I reviewed it a long time ago.
Oh, well, yeah. So it had aspects in it for workforce housing, but there was no actual benefit to going that route versus the normal route. So there was actually probably more hoops to jump through to verify that it was workforce housing, that people just went the normal route. There's a lot more technical speak that goes to all of that, but that's the basics. So we're going to be working with our water department when they get here on what we can include in a recommended amendment to the water issues subcommittee. First, I think, is where it has to go first, but to not only include something for workforce housing, but also to include incentives for developers to want to go that route. So to make it beneficial. When we had a meeting about it, just to kind of prep for this meeting, it sounds like finding a path to administrative approval is probably the best incentive route. And then we'll go through there. So do you guys have any ideas, concepts before they get here that you want to see included for sure? Or just seeing what they have in mind? Concepts would be awesome while we're stalling.
personally, I'm looking forward to hearing from the subject matter experts. I don't want to pretend to be a water expert.
Yeah, I was
That's
gonna
okay.
say the same thing. Yeah.
All right. So, what we can do, I'm trying to pull up everything, but we can actually, if you're okay with it, jump ahead to a couple little things, like the town hall dates for staff updates.
Yeah,
So
let's talk about that.
we had talked about January 30th. Sorry, I don't want to lose the place in that one. Right? That's the date that we ended up on.
Triple check, but I believe that's correct. Yes.
Okay. How does everybody look for potentially a town hall in the evening hours of January 30th to have a town hall about more engagement, letting people know what you all have been working towards? We'll talk about a website towards the end of our meeting. That will get some more information out there too, but we want to check that date before we can set it up. And we plan on coordinating this with our workforce housing needs assessment contractor as well, so that they can also use this platform as a way to gather additional information they need for their information as well.
Can I
Evening
add-
works better for me than day on that day.
Okay.
Can I add to what you're saying, Amber?
Yes, please.
So we met, Amber and I met recently with marketing PR team for the city and talked about the date specifically so that we were not in conflict with holidays, election, all the other things that could be a distraction in this season, and but wanted to still get the earliest available date so that we can start engaging with the community as part of our community outreach goals. They recommended that we do a hybrid session so that it would be available for people to Zoom in. We don't know exactly if it'll be Zoom or another platform. They're investigating that piece. But the idea being that it would be held here, and we're inviting any and all stakeholders, but anyone, employees, employers, just to catch them up on what we've been working on, those who are not, don't have the time to sit and watch every single meeting that we're doing, so that we can give them a really quick, truly, we want to give a brief high-level overview of what we've been doing, more so with the intention to get their feedback and participation so that when we do go to present our recommendations to council in the spring that we've started to engage these people. That's the goal.
So we'll send out more information about that, but just wanted to check the date and we'll send it out to everybody too. And yeah, we'll have some more information on that. All right, let's see what.
Works
other-
for me, and you'll email the 3 missing members to
Yes.
get their input.
Yeah, and then hopefully with the hybrid, we'll be able to have everybody there. We'll do a quorum, a pretty basic agenda to discuss workforce housing. But hopefully everyone will be able to attend either in person or virtually. So that should be a pretty neat one. The housing needs assessment, we are working with the contract, getting some T's crossed, I's dotted, but that will be completed by March. That's going to involve a decent amount of public engagement as well. I believe they plan on doing surveys and gathering data that we can use too going forward. That alongside, I don't know if everybody was able to watch the council meeting from October 8th, or at least see the conversation that happened about the position. So council they approved us going for either a contracted company or a contracted position with a consulting firm being the priority first. So we are writing up the RFP to get that published. We would like someone on board before March, but they need to be on board by March so that they can take the housing needs assessment and create the things we need from it. But we're hoping that they're on board before that so they can work hand in hand with the company to get data and be familiar with their process. If for some reason we put the RFP out and aren't able to find a company that fulfills what we need in the amount that we need it for, then we will go out and try to find a contract employee to do that. Do you guys have any questions on that one? Man, you guys have no questions today. We're going to blow through the rest of this. While we're waiting for our water team, IT, can we pull up the Participate Prescott webpage? We'll take a look at that real quick. This is it's not a live website yet, so we'll send it to you soon for you to look at. We want your feedback on it. This is going to be a landing page for everything you guys have been working on, public events that are going to be coming up, and to get information out there, as well as to include survey questions that could help the company with the housing needs assessment. Okay, we're going to put a pause on that one. And since our water team's here, we're going to go back to that.
Can we finish the Participate Prescott just since we're already in the flow of that? We've been waiting
IT,
for
can
him.
we get it up by chance? We'll see if IT can pull it up. Always work, yeah. Nice when technology plays well.
Okay. Guess we'll move back to water.
Okay. All right. There, maybe? You know when you plan something in your head and it goes so smoothly and in order, and then there we go. So if you'll scroll down just a little bit so everybody can get a view of the page. This is just all of the documents we've created, some survey questions as placeholder for when we can get more in-depth survey questions. So we'll send this out to everybody. Would love your feedback on anything you'd like. And we also are trying to gather stories from people to add in that more human element.
John is here. Maybe he could speak a little bit to the vision behind Participate Prescott to catch everyone up if that doesn't know. Okay.
So yes, Participate Prescott is a relatively new tool that the city has. It's a civic engagement platform, fancy term for a website where you can talk back and forth. It really has a lot of tools and capabilities that could be used. So the way you set up a page is you set it up as a project. So for example, we just put a page up to talk about Prop 478, and we put all the documents in there so people could see what we were talking about. We can do something similar for workforce housing. We can put older documents up, anything current, so people can go in and review whatever they want. But the most powerful part of this, or the most powerful tools, are the two-way communications. Amber mentioned a survey. There's ways to do different types of surveys. If anyone's ever worked with SurveyMonkey, there's lots of different ways to ask questions, right? So we can plug that in based on your direction. But this can live ongoing. This can be up for as long as this committee is operational, and we can continue to add more information. If we need a new survey farther down the line, we can do something different. But it's just a great communication tool. Our job from the city communications is to make sure people know about it and to make sure people come to the page and participate. Obviously, there's tracking with all of the answers, so we know how many people saw the survey, how many people answered. Obviously, we get the results tabulated. So there's really pretty much what we would say to you is tell us what you need, and we probably can build something with this. And if we can't, we'll let you know. But we can continue an ongoing dialogue about this. But we're just getting this up and running.
Thanks for doing this, John. I do have a question. Are we able to name a URL specifically?
We can. So this is actually Participate Prescott is the generic URL which gets you to all of the city projects. If you said we want PrescottWorkforceHousing.com, whatever, we could have one that directs right to this particular project page. People will still get to it through Participate Prescott, but if you want something directed right to this, that can be done as well.
Great.
I'm not the URL guy, but I think that can be done.
I think that could be helpful if we're doing any sort of PSAs or other marketing materials that kind of coincides with what we're doing. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Any questions?
Yeah, is the vision for this in its infancy still? I can see where this could be a super useful public interface tool, such as integrating not just our efforts, but our stakeholders, such as the county, with their streamline. So, for example, the Home for Everyone under the county, maybe featuring those links. And the more we kind of cross-pollinate, maybe the more exposure we're able to get out to public awareness for that.
Absolutely. Yeah, this can put resource links up. You can really build this page to do whatever you need it to do. Again, tell us what you need. My team can. Harley was supposed to be here. We got our schedules confused, but she's the one that's going to build it. And so tell us what you need. We'll have two-way through Amber on how to build this and what to add to it. And this, like I say, this can live as your page throughout the entire project.
Thank you, John.
Of course.
All right, so now we will go back to the originally scheduled planning and have our water team talk about what they have seen in the past, what they would like to hear from you guys, and try to find if we can create an amendment that works for everybody in a way.
Hello, everybody. I'm Brian Reese. I'm the Water Resources Environmental Services Manager here for the city. So Amber had sent me over a few documents in the past to look at your guys' efforts to include water as a possible incentive and way to gain support for workforce housing. So Amber was good enough to start off by putting out a template document that I've had a little chance to review. At this point, I'd like to go over just a couple of the things, and maybe we can have a brief discussion on what's important to the committee in terms of what they think might be the best benefit from the water policy, and so that I can concentrate on those things. But I'll kind of go over kind of like an outline of an approach that we might start to look at and go from there. So the first item is the workforce housing earnings or income requirements in the program. So these, I think the Workforce Housing Committee will have to, will come up with these items based on your own information and other sources that are available to you for good levels of this. Obviously, with the water, we'll try to provide the incentive on the water side. But one thing to think about is prescribing the income range for the housing and the cost of the housing, leases, home prices, mortgage, whatever it may be. One of the items that I think we'll have to think about is how that will be monitored in the future after those housings are released, so that make sure that those levels of income or property rental rates or lease rates are staying within the targeted range. Moving over, I think on this program, a couple things that we'd like to see in it is conservation measures within the communities that will be utilizing this program. So we'll come up with some strategies and some recommendations for you on various indoor and outdoor conservation measures that we might want to include in the program. I think we'll have to identify if we want to include those in only the units that are going to be workforce housing units or in the entire community. I would lean at this point to think that we would want to include those for the entire community. I don't see any benefit in, and it might not even be really a benefit for a developer to try to construct one unit with certain water technologies and savings and conservation, and then another portion of the development. And from a water standpoint, I like to see these type of conservation efforts done program-wide. So even if there's only maybe workforce housing makes up 25% of that particular community, the conservation efforts may be applied to the entire program, but we can talk about that a little bit more as we go. So what we'll do on our end is we'll come up with indoor and outdoor incentives that we think might be appropriate for a program like this, looking at landscape requirements that meet certain objectives, indoor fixture requirements that might meet certain objectives that we might want to hit. So we'll look at this either as a component of a target water usage that we might want to see about, or target for this particular program, or it might come from another direction too. We're regulated by ADWR in the AMA for our conservation program. They are looking at reducing GPCD rates for water conservation for the cities. So we might look at what those gallons per capita day rates from ADWR might be, and maybe do either that target or some type, or maybe a percentage of that target might be a good way to approach that. So having that incentive or conservation approach would be one end of it. Looking at possibly doing a putting a pool of water aside. Right now we're in our active DNO, decision and order for ADWR. That's our assured water supply. So we're working with them to determine all of our demands that for the next 100 years that the city will incur, and what our supplies the next 100 years will be. Once we get through that process, we'll know what supplies we legally have and what demands we have to legally meet. There should be a buffer between those two things. So there's possibility once we know that buffer that we could take a certain amount of that water, 50 acre feet, 100 acre feet, and apply it to this program. So that we set it aside. We know that it's part of our assured water supply. It's in our supplies. We're able to grant that for this program, and then utilize that to achieve the goals of the program, maybe through, if we get with council and we set, we go over the program, this water set aside, it's available. If everybody agrees on its usage, we can provide maybe an incentive like administratively approving water that meets all the requirements for the program. That would give a streamlined ability for a development to come through, and we have to obviously set up all of the administrative requirements to show that they're going to meet the landscape or the water conservation incentives, that they've meet their income thresholds, everything else that's part of the program. But if we could get through that, maybe we could get them an incentive administratively moving the water faster, so that's a time incentive. Other things that we've talked about is possibly looking at impact fee credit, is what I would call it at this point in time. So if a certain number of workforce housing units within the community or within the project meet a threshold 25%, there would be a certain impact fee credit that the city would pick up to provide that second kind of more income or cost-based incentive for the program. So those are just a couple, kind of the things that we're kind of tossing around at this point in time, looking at making sure that if we're going to go for a workforce housing project that's going to be have a water incentive, that we have a water conservation element to it, so that we're getting credit for that, and looking at an administrative way of getting these projects faster through the system by having a designated water supply that we're putting aside for the program. So we know that it's working with our assured water supply, it's there, and that's how we can provide that incentive. And possibly maybe a reduction of impact fees might be that third incentive that would entice people to use this program, because that's obviously what we want to do, is we want to make it worthwhile for the development community to create this workforce housing. We want to make sure that the water that we're giving them, that we're doing it in a way that doesn't jeopardize our assured water supply, and will work for us, and that we'll get conservation benefit out of it too. So that's kind of what I have at this point in time.
Thank you, Brian, for sharing. I guess one question I have, when you talk about the budgeting for the 100-year plan, I don't fully understand how it works now, so this might be a silly question, but is it sort of like a pie, if you will, where each type of project currently is allocated a certain amount of water currently?
Yeah, so right now, the way it works is we go through our water policy. So our water policy sets how a project has to come in. It has to do a water service application, gives the information on that project, goes through the water policy. If the water that is being requested by that project meets certain minimal thresholds, then it goes administratively through. It's actually pretty small water amounts. If it's less than 4 units of single-family residential, it doesn't have any subdivision rule requirements, then we can administratively move those very small projects through. For non-residential, if it's 1.5 acre feet per year, if they're using less than 1.5 acre feet, we can move them through. Otherwise, they have to go through the Water Issues Subcommittee. So they set up, and kind of to back up, if they have a formal planning requirement, they'll have to go through planning and zoning first, get recommended approval through there, and then they can go through the Water Issues Subcommittee. So they set up a meeting to go through there. We present their water service application. That committee recommends either approval or denial. Then it has to move through and go to City Council voting meeting. And then the council as a whole votes on whether to grant that water request or not. So that's the current process. So what I'm talking about is maybe some way to streamline that process where it's more of an administrative approval, as long as all the boxes are checked off on this project in terms of meeting the workforce housing requirement.
Brian, I wonder if it would be helpful to explain to Nicole how water is the city currency, and there is an established cost per credit, and then and when people are coming forward with these projects, we have this thing we call the WORM, and I know it's an acronym for water. What is it? The acronym?
Water Resource Management Model.
And so it would run through that, and then the city would establish, based on prior projects that are similar, how much expected water use out of a project that would come with that size. So it is sort of a semi-scientific thing, but if you keep in mind that there is a value to each one of those water credits. Do you know it offhand?
Like if the city wanted to go out and buy additional water supply, I think the rule of thumb is about $300 per acre foot. And then you need to supply for 100 years so that's $300 times 100 years of $30,000 an acre foot to supply a development water for 100 years. This would be a process that somebody would have to go through to build outside of the city in an area that doesn't have assured water supply. So what we've in essence done is we've provided all the data and information to ADWR and said, here's our city limits, here's our service area, here's our current users, here's our users that we know we've committed to because we've approved their subdivision maps and they have plats, and then there's the projected users. We know that if we have these committed users, these future users here, they're going to need schools and commercial and restaurants and fire stations and all those things that go through. So we have those three levels, and then we add them all together. This is our demand. Then we have to then we have to go through our supplies. This is our groundwater supply. This is our effluent that we can recharge. This is our surface water supplies from our 2 reservoirs, and we do modeling. We actually do modeling that shows that these supplies are available for 100 years, meeting the requirements of ADWR. And once we do that, they grant us that ability to have that assured water supply. And now we can give that water out to the developments that come to our community versus a community that doesn't have an assured water supply. They would have to go and find that water through the open market, basically, and that's where the water that cost for water comes into play. So yes, it definitely has a associated cost per credit or cost per unit of water that we give out. There's a market value to that. Yes. So with that. We have a tool called the Water Resource Management Model. We put all of our demands into that model, and then it's a dynamic model. So as accounts come in on a yearly basis, it's updated. It determines how much water is being used per each account, and it's a way for us to track how much water we're using at any given time compared to what we have in our assured water supply. With that, the current water policy also has a water budget. So it has a water budget for residential and non-residential as kind of a tracking mechanism that we try to stay within on a biannual basis, and to track and see how much water we're releasing from our assured water supply for non-residential and for residential. And it's just in conjunction with the water resource management model, it helps us understand where we are at any given time and where our projections are. Are we moving very, very quickly, and it's a period of high development, and we need to think about how we can continue to give water at this and at this pace, if there's going to be an issue, or do we need to slow things down, or where we are at any point in time. So, but those two tools kind of help, and that's how we work it at this point in time, trying to figure out where we are at any given time with water.
One other thing I wanted to add, just for your benefit, Nicole, is when people are estimating a project or something, the big things that make a difference, for example, if you're going to try to fit into the requirements of workforce housing and you're working with a water allocation, things that we would be looking for is that would jack this up is, do you have a swimming pool? Do you want lush landscaping? Are you trying to provide a park? Are you not going to provide low flow toilets, although it is a requirement now, but those are things that are going to take from your bank of water. So if you start out with a basic bank of water and you start to build all those things on top of it, it's going to change whether or not you fit into that workforce housing mold. So when you see these workforce housing, you know, a lot of people are saying, well, they look like the projects. Well, they have minimal landscaping. They don't have a swimming pool, so that they can fit into that and bring the price down. But all that other extra stuff not only costs more water, it costs a lot more money too. So.
Well, Mr. Reese, my question to you on this, it sounds like integrating the cost per credit along with the capacity to serve from an enduring perspective, there's a couple variables that we could take into consideration. I'm not sure if they're already taken into consideration specifically towards the workforce housing objective and your conservation efforts. Have we reached out to the city code enforcement and the city fire authority? Because if we're going to take incentives into perspective here along with the income limitations, perhaps the incentive for Firewise through the city fire authority to confirm that the property is made of non-combustibles materials. They've taken that into consideration. From the xeriscaping perspective, that all the ladder fuels have been trimmed up in the area, and that may qualify specific incentive. Because if we take into consideration that now the city's not going to be holding the bag using 10,000 gallons of water to put out a fire because it has been mitigated, the risk has been mitigated, then maybe that can go into the cost calculation in there to create those incentives to come up with a mutually beneficial. Code enforcement specifically, land use violations. Do we have debris cleaned up? Do we have, non-operable vehicles that could potentially serve as another fuel for fire? Do you see the capacity to integrate that into your WORM tool to come up with that incentive that we're seeking with the impact fees?
I'm not sure if integrating it in the WORM tool is how feasible that would be. I mean, we could look at it, but everything that you brought up in terms of incentives or parts of the workforce housing program could be implemented. I don't see any reason why they couldn't. They have maybe secondary impact to water supply or water conservation efforts within the city. I agree with you 100%. They're important components or parts of the program that maybe don't directly impact water conservation, but as being a community that's ready for emergency and resilient water response, super important. So with that, I would encourage if those are the things that are important to the committee, I think they definitely have benefit to the city's ability to respond to things like emergencies, fires, that are part of the city's water supply. And working those into the program would make sense. I think that maybe having fire department representatives and that have that expert knowledge on those programs would be useful, and I could definitely work with them on it. But yeah, it's not something that I was directly thinking of, but I don't see why it couldn't be part of the program.
Thank you.
Yep. At some point, as part of this process, we're going to have to make recommendations to the mayor and council on how to, what those parameters are, specific parameters, and then how are those parameters going to be maintained. One of the things we've talked about is we've spent a lot of time talking about what the monthly or annual income levels will be and what that relates to rents, but we haven't talked about, okay, well, how does that roll into a purchase if a landowner, developer, philanthropic organization says, well, we're gonna build a workforce housing for sale to allow the people to start building equity. I mean, what are those parameters? How do I identify that? Is it since we're talking about an annual or monthly income level, okay, how does that relate to a mortgage? And what's the interest rate? What's the mortgage term? All of those things are going to change that monthly value. So I think we've got to, at some point, relatively soon, we need to start establishing setting those parameters, and then how we're going to enforce, because what we don't want to do is offer incentives and then the landowner, developer, philanthropic organization doesn't follow through.
Yeah.
There's some guardrails that we need to start establishing, and my opinion is the sooner the better.
Yeah, no, agreed. So one of the things that we can work on in water resources directly is getting those components of the water incentives and requirements for your workforce housing program. So indoor water requirements, we'll have suggestions for you on that. Outdoor water requirement suggestions, we'll base it on targets of trying to get conservation measures in place to target water use for these communities, and we'll base it off other communities that have looked at the same type of programs. We'll look at, and also look at our own regulatory requirements for gallons per capita day. We can, I can work with Public Works to look at those impact fee reductions as another incentive. Now, as for the actual income ratio to pricing on the homes, that's not really my expertise. I think through the work of the committee here, with the help of Amber, maybe the financial department at the city, some other sources, we could start targeting where that part of the program lies. I don't think my expertise doesn't lie in that ability to determine what's that good sweet spots between workforce housing, income levels, and housing prices.
Right.
But you're right. It's a super big component of the program.
Right.
That will need to be addressed.
And I think we are going to have to recommend just a standard, a policy, because we don't know whether that mortgage is going to be 4% or 6%. We don't know if they're going to get a 20-year mortgage or a 30-year mortgage or a 15-year mortgage. But we as policymakers will need to say, we're going to use this as the baseline. And what you do from there is, but here's how you have to meet the requirements. If we as the city or somebody's going to philanthropically look at help the situation, they're going to want some assurance that there's going to be follow through, and they're going to meet those requirements.
Yeah, exactly. So there lies in the challenge. I'll be working with with Amber and other department sources, and we'll see if we can kind of target those areas and bring something back. As for the other things that I talked about directly related to water, I've asked my staff to start working on getting those requirements and incentives kind of down so that maybe you guys can see it. Meet once a month. Is that the? So I think we should be able to have at least a rough a draft of those elements for you for review at your next meeting. That should be.
By the way,
our
don't
target.
forget, in our first 3 or 4 meetings, we had been provided, I think by Amber and possibly Chelsea, with the HUD requirement guidelines. So we have, we don't have to reinvent that wheel. If we find that, that's already all detailed through HUD for the income levels and what percentage of their income and whether they fit in those guidelines. And we had those at one point. I think I have them in my office.
And I think we've done that, and that works great for a rental unit.
Yeah.
But when we start talking about, okay, if someone's going to build a workforce housing project or provide housing for sale, okay, what is that? Is that a $275,000 house, or is that a $375,000 house?
Well, I think it's based on 30% of their income.
Yep, but Connie, what I'm saying is, so is there a down payment? is there, what interest rate and what's the term of the loan?
Yeah.
To get that to a monthly value, to say, okay, a home at this price meets workforce housing, it doesn't, and those other elements have to be factored in. And I think the city needs to establish, we're gonna use this as the baseline.
Yeah.
And that way we can come up with a monthly value that says, okay, a home, if you're gonna offer homes at $295,000, that's workforce housing, and we'll help with that.
Right.
If it's above that, that no longer meets the parameter.
And again, I think that what happens is there's a website or a tool that you can plug a person's income in, and then you basically you back up. This is how much they make. This is 30%. What kind of a house can they afford under these terms with this interest
Right.
rate and the down payment?
Right,
And so
exactly.
maybe we can find that and provide a link to it where anybody out there, based on their income, their salary, they can plug their income, and then it populates the amount of the house that they can earn based on that 30%. Because obviously, not everybody in the workforce housing is going to be making the same amount of money. So that's going to be a sliding scale.
And you bring up a good point, Connie, to that. I think, to Mike's point in terms of adopting baselines, I think the median income limitations that have already been established, as you said, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. However, when we factor in external variables that are going to move that price point on the home, I think that we need to be careful there, because the first thing that happens is when interest rates go lower, it puts upward pricing pressure on homes.
Right.
So if we establish a price range of homes, that effort can potentially become futile because of external variables such as interest rates that influence that. So I think focusing on that median income would be a good baseline. However, we don't want to limit our options or become a target of liability for accusation of unequal housing opportunities and so forth. So we should adopt, to coincide with that, an exception policy. What I mean by that is that we've identified that we are, for example, abundantly short with healthcare professionals. And, a healthcare professional is a good example of somebody that may be above that income limitation, but is desperately needed for the workforce segment, not so much a low to moderate income targeted individual.
We might need categories then. We
Yeah.
established the need here for Prescott proper with healthcare, police, fire, restaurant workers. Maybe we need to, because obviously a fireman or a policeman is going to make a little bit more than a waitress would make. Maybe we
Correct.
do need to establish some categories for Prescott's issues alone.
And that's where I say adopting HUD's income policy is a great instrument for a baseline. But if we have exceptions that will enable us to expand as the community sees fit, and also legal, I think that's going to be critical for us.
So, real quick, just so we can, because I think a lot of this is going to fall into our conversations about the actual workforce housing policy. Does anybody have some water direct questions for Brian before because then we can jump into the actual policy, where I think a lot of those ranges discussions are going to take place more, and they'll affect any programs that kind of stem from it.
Yeah, I have a question about, I guess, the next meeting when you bring it. What is in your opinion, the most optimistic way to incentivize the development of workforce housing?
Probably, right now I would say is probably credits for wastewater impact fees. I think that's probably. I think there's some incentive on the administrative approval to move the process through faster, and I've given some thought. I was trying to think, well, what other incentive could we give from a water, from the basis of water, And the impact fees is what I came up with. There's not so much of it, of a bureaucratic or administrative process with so many hurdles in it in the city. I think the administrative approval and streamlining that, there's value to it, but it's kind of just, it is what it is. It would be a way to kind of bypass having to go through a water issue subcommittee. It's going to save a month or two. We don't have any other hurdles in our water policy too much. That I could think of. So now I started thinking about it, cost incentives and fees.
Yes. So if there was like a policy that said, if you're intending on doing workforce housing, you don't have to go through the water subcommittee. You could just go straight to council, and that can be part of your overall approval if it's more than 4 units or something to that effect.
Yeah, that's another thing is I'm sure the council will want to see projects if we start getting into really, really big projects too. But maybe that could still be a streamlined effort involved with that. But yeah, there would probably be some type of, I would think, some type of cap, if a project, if it gets too big. Maybe there's other mechanisms that the council will see that project and understands what's happening other than with the water too. So,
Well, and we could craft if we wanted to, although it's limiting.
Sorry, I'm going to be that person. Can we all talk directly into the mics and a little bit louder? It's not coming across as clearly on the video. Sorry.
We could do a model of a project so that anybody deciding to go into this would understand what the cost would be for that size of a project, something reasonable. Anything above and beyond that would have to be, allocated on a case-by-case basis. But that way, I think it's more clear. But we did have a discussion about the impact fees on council. I don't know if anybody saw that. One of the things that Community Development and Mark Woodfill, our finance director, we don't, those impact fees still have to be paid. So if the builder or the developer is given that incentive, we still pay those. We're just allowing the builder and the developer to not pay them, but the taxpayers still have to pay the impact fees. It's got to come from somewhere. But it's a great incentive. If the project is something, that the council and staff deems as very, very important, then those exceptions could be made. But they still have to be paid. I mean, that's the main thing. So if we make the decision to allow that to happen, just remember the taxpayers pick up the bill for it anyway. But, these workforce housing units are very important to us.
I'm just talking about time, not impact fees, Like if that month or two can be alleviated, then that's something that we could put in a policy that's really easy for everybody to understand and move on.
No, agreed. And as we move through, if there's some other incentives that come up, we'll bring them up.
Okay. Yeah, and I think it's, and you're looking at it twofold. You've got a monetary incentive, and like you said, set aside a bucket of water that's just not available unless it is workforce housing. So, but both of those things together is a pretty strong incentive to pursue, or not just an incentive, but something that helps bridge that gap. The bottom line is, here's workforce housing and here's the cost.
Yeah.
And you got to bridge that gap.
Agreed.
Any other questions for Brian? Actually, I do have one last question. Just in light of us being as efficient as we can be during our meetings, would it be possible for your team to send that language to Amber the week prior to the meeting? Yeah. Okay. That'd be great. Do we need to wait till the end of the meeting, or?
Not because we're at the end of this subject. So
Okay.
we're okay with it.
Go ahead, Howard.
I wanted to make a couple comments regarding water and workforce housing. Perhaps because some of the staff wasn't here back in 2016, I wanted to cover some history here that wasn't covered that's important for the committee. Because there was a previous reservation for workforce housing, do you know how much of that was used? None.
0.
Zero. Why was that? Was it because people didn't want to build workforce housing? No. People wanted to build workforce housing. But there was enough water in the other water allocation, the general water allocation, for the demand to build. And people wanted to build market rate houses where they can make some money, which I don't have a problem with. As you know, the workforce housing didn't pencil out back then, but they didn't have incentives. So they weren't being built, 0. So if you want to have a reservation for workforce housing, don't waste your time unless you make it large enough and make the other pool small enough where people will really, who are building, really have to consider, I need to go use this workforce water because I'm going to have a hard time using this other water. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't continue to build houses that are 4,000 square feet or market rate houses, but you're going to have to think about this if you really want this incentive to work or if you want it to look good. Now, the other issue is regarding the cost of the retired grandfathered irrigation credits. There is a market, and I don't want to get too technical here, but when somebody retires irrigation use of water in the AMA under the state rules, they can transfer that water right to another user in the AMA. Those credits are getting very limited. They're being bought up by other parties. And I suggest that the city of Prescott consider buying some of these credits before they're gone. This will increase the supply of water for the city of Prescott. The city of Prescott could recoup that expense through impact fees. My other,
We've got 15 seconds left.
okay. I had suggested in my written proposal that you consider a water allocation for workforce housing in city areas outside the city limits where we have water service. As you know, over 10%, I believe, of our water service is outside the city limits. Right now, the policy is no water outside the city limits, even if it's in the city water service area.
Our time's up.
I think you
Thank
should
you.
consider that.
Thank you, Howard. Brian, since you're still here, do you want to comment on the water credit point that was just made?
It's a strategy by the city, whether they want to purchase extinguishment credits that are available in the AMA. Those opportunities come up from time to time. When they do, we inform council of those opportunities, and if it's something that the council wants to pursue at that point in time, we can do it. We've purchased in the past. Haven't purchased since my time being here in the last couple of years, but it does come up from time to time, people looking to purchase. Most of the ones I've seen we're not talking about huge purchases. So they supplement the water supply, but it's just kind of one small component of making sure that you have assured water supply. But yeah, it's an opportunity.
Thank you. we moving on to the rest of our policy?
Yes, so IT is going to bring up the policy. Thank you, Brian, for your time on that. So when it comes to this policy, I know we're going to be running a little short on time today, which is fine. I would really appreciate if everybody takes time outside of here to read through it, because I think there's going to be things that we've talked about even today that'll come up later in the policy that they might be addressed. There's a whole section about enforcement, things like that. So if everyone can take, I know it's like 30 pages, but if everyone could take some time to at least review it ahead of time, we'll be going over this the next couple of months and making adjustments, changing things. That would just help the process move a little bit smoother. I know we've talked about the ranges for housing and HUD and things like that. I will look for a tool for that and send it out to everybody once I find a good one, whether it's through HUD or a good credible source. But if anybody has any recommendations for a range, if you want to email that to me, I can always bring a draft of that and look into that too. I think it's a good idea. I just think there's some thoughts about what exactly it should look like. So if you send it to me, then we can include it and talk about it and go from there.
Amber, Gorman did have in their packet, I think it was from HUD directly.
Okay.
If you wanted to look at that for reference.
Yeah, so I'll look at that as well, and we'll see if we can, and we can always, I don't know if there's anything, we'd have to look at it, but I don't know if there's anything saying we can't put an actual recommendation to go look at a website in the policy of, go look at HUD here, this is the tool we use. That could actually be part of the policy, that it's just that sliding scale. So as we go through, I'm not attached to any of this, so please dissect it as is needed. We talked about the headers at our last meeting. They haven't changed, they just got rearranged, and the ones that were requested are put in there. Keep in mind as we go through this policy, it is a 30,000 foot view. You guys are recommending to council to direct staff to do things. So I know there are some programs we really want to get in and build, but some of those programs are ultimately going to be up to staff to build, bring to you as a result. So it's more directing rather than building the in the weeds details. Go ahead.
Can we go back a slide?
Yeah.
Okay, so under revitalization and infill, I don't think that we need a whole nother category, but to coincide with that is just simply admitting or identifying that this issue is not going to be resolved with 100% within the city limits of Prescott. We need to expand our outreach to areas that we consider a reasonable commute to address the housing issue that we have here, or the workforce labor issue that we're looking for. So we've titled it revitalization and infill, perhaps something along the lines of expanded footprint outside the city limits.
Okay. Expanded footprints. Okay.
And this is really minor, but we've got pre-approved plans on there twice, and I
Do we?
would suggest maybe it's under incentive. It is an incentive, right? I don't know. Maybe not.
I'll fix that's on there twice. Don't know how that happened. That's what happens when you stare at something too long. But it's up to you guys. We can keep it set apart, or we can put it under incentives, either one. All right. So we'll go through kind of the basics today, the introduction, some of our introductory things, and then we do have some staff updates I really want to get to before we conclude today. Again, as you go through this on your own too, any adjustments, recommendations, please just email it to me. I can update it, bring it to future meetings too. Even if we get to the last chapter and you're like, you know what, I saw this in introduction, I'd love to change this. We're going to use this as a pretty fluid document. Some of these slides are very text heavy. I apologize in advance. But this introduction just goes through what we're trying to do, who our workforce is. It goes into a lot more detail later. But it talks about the committee's mission and vision that were approved by council. It also talks about and I put on here, these ones have been approved by council, so we can't change them without taking them back to council. So if we do want to recommend changes on this, then we would bring those changes to council and we bring the whole policy back. But right now, these were approved by council. They're kind of what they are. We can definitely add in the toolkit about what price range of a house is included, though. So this is nothing new. We've been staring at this for a while. This one, again, a little text heavy, looks much better on the actual printed page, but these are also the council approved fact sheet, just talking about the positive impacts of workforce housing, how they foster a diverse community, support education systems, civic participation. So the things that we talked about in depth as we were building those a while back. Continues because I didn't want to drown you guys too much in text. There are introductory and conclusion paragraphs to most of these that are pretty changeable. But they're just generic of summarizing the city will conduct ongoing community outreach to gather input. And that's kind of the direction to the committee and to staff, that we need to continue to conduct ongoing community outreach to gather input, continued foster collaboration among stakeholders, incorporate their feedback into strategies. It may include, but not limited to, regular workforce housing meetings. So that just shows that even if things quiet down and this is all we do, it's still something, but we need to still keep doing engagement. Eligibility is one area that goes into a lot more detail about the eligible workforce, the different areas that are not necessarily limited to the ones we've talked about, and includes the income limitations that is part of our definition of workforce. Residency requirements is something kind of new. We can either keep that or get rid of that. It's reside in Prescott or the surrounding Yavapai County area, or be employed full-time within the city of Prescott or industries directly benefiting the community, such as healthcare. So that could be somebody who currently lives in Phoenix, but is trying to move up here. They work up here, they want to move up here. So we can adjust the wording on that one. We can scrap that altogether, or we can keep that. What are your guys' thoughts on the?
I really like that, and that ties in directly to what I was talking about, our exceptions. Now, you've done a great job of saying 120% of the area median income, and then directly above that under eligible workforce, you have listed the targeted workforce that we are desiring. So that works ideal for our exception efforts that we want to work into as well. So I think the last piece that can be improved upon that is just the final bullet point there: be employed full-time within the city of Prescott. Just indicate that, you've indicated there, such as healthcare, education, and public safety. You could just simply refer it back to the eligible workforce header directly above it.
Okay. All right. And again, if you think of something later, you can always send me an email and we can bring it back too. This slideshow will be our template, so we can go back and forth. I won't have just sections of code as we go through this, so that if there's anything we need to go back to, it's always available. So this is for eligible developers. This is something that will probably need a lot of working on, and may even be the part that we can include. They need to have it in this range of housing prices. So it covers a lot of things: public-private partnerships, governmental entities working jointly on workforce housing, like our PUSD project, for-profit, nonprofit. Try to include everybody in there, but also project types must include rental or home ownership units that cater to the eligible workforce population. could include multifamily complexes, single-family homes, mixed-use developments. Locations must be located within the city of Prescott with a focus on areas close to public transit, employee centers, schools, and other community amenities. Because this is a city of Prescott policy, I thought it'd be good to have it to where we can only control what's actually in our area. So if we're looking at eligible developers, none of our incentives are going to generally help them if they're building in Prescott Valley. So that's kind of why that's in there, is that we have to control what we control. So there's affordability requirements. They must agree to maintain an affordability for a minimum period of 20 years. That's obviously a flexible number that we could adjust, but that's something that we could even just put in the policy so the developers know, if I plan on using any of the incentives that are in this policy, I know I'm bound to this for whatever time period. I know Gorman said that they were moving up to like 30-year time periods for holding their different projects accountable to the affordability range. So any questions on this? I know there's so much on this screen.
Yeah, Amber, my observation on that is that we just need to be very careful with language such as the first one there, project type. Projects must include rental or homeownership units that cater to. We don't want to create loopholes where it's just something with the intent, because the word intent gets, our legal department needs to have the capacity to have some teeth. Something where we can enforce something tangible. So yes, catering, don't misunderstand me. Catering, it's great to cater to that audience, but how can we describe it under eligibility where within the description we have clear language that we can enforce?
And I don't know, Matt, maybe you can speak to this. When does inclusionary play a role? Can we say if you're doing in this policy, you must only have the workforce in there? Nah.
Start with the obvious, or the basic, that inclusionary zoning is illegal in Arizona. So we can't have a policy that says you will have a certain amount of workforce housing in any particular development. So beyond that, does that answer the question, first of all? Or are you looking towards, we can incentivize and we can do voluntary agreements with people to get to workforce housing. And that's what this whole policy is about. How do we incentivize developers into creating workforce housing? And then what was your particular question, Amber?
What is the, sorry, I know I'm going to hear that. What is the strongest wording we can use instead of cater to? Can we say they must house the eligible workforce population?
Yeah. Yeah, we'll move away from the kind of the niceties and the caterings and the maze and try to make this more something that is enforceable. That's a good point. You know, you don't want to use kind of weakened language where it's going to work against you. So I kind of went through this. I don't know which version they have, Amber, the one that I went through or this one. Most recent one. So yeah, we'll continue to kind of look at this and adjust as we go.
All right, any other questions on this page? And I'll probably end after this one so we can get to a couple of the staff updates. So this is just the conclusionary paragraph for this, that the guidelines are designed to support the growth of Prescott, ensuring the housing needs of the local workforce are met. So we'll work on adjusting some of those phrasings and have a newer version or a redline version for you guys. On any adjustments, we'll continue to redline it and send it to you and attach it as the agenda item too. IT, could we go back to the original PowerPoint? Okay, so on that, please keep thinking about the eligibility portion of it, the introduction, the outreach. Let me know if there's anything else you want added in there other than what's been mentioned today, and we'll keep adjusting it. Over the next few months, that's kind of what we'll be doing, is having an open conversation. Again, it'll be easier if you read it and have notes ahead of time of what you want changed in it. And then hopefully by April, we'll have a full one for a full review to take to council in May. So
Can I make a quick comment? Just something I've been thinking about, I wanted to share with you guys. When we're thinking about these incentives and working through all of this policy language, something I'd love for you to think about is, do we want to consider almost like a sliding scale of incentives? Now, I recognize it depends whether it's a private development or if it's a nonprofit. There's a lot of factors of who might be doing this. But if somebody is developing a project that's 25% workforce housing versus somebody who's doing 100%, shouldn't they get a little bit more, right? If they're doing a little bit more. So just something to think about what that might look like. Maybe 25%, 50%, 100%, something like that.
And I will say, there's a lot of things staff is still reviewing that may or may not be doable. There's a decent amount of this that I borrowed from some other amazing jurisdictions, such as Flagstaff and Tucson. One thing Flagstaff had was fees, and depending on how much of the project was workforce housing, determined how much of those fees would either be waived or discounted too. So that's something we'll get into, and if that's a template that we like. So
Thanks, Amber.
yeah, so we'll see how it goes. All right, so we talked about Participate Prescott. I'll send the website so you guys can look at that. Let us know your feedback on that, any additional information you'd like on that. Town Hall, we'll plan for January 30th in the evening. I'll send that in the email as well. Housing needs assessment, getting up and going, will be done by March. Goal update, knew there was something bigger. Is there any future agenda items that you guys want on there, or are we content to mostly have the policy and things that come up with the policy over the next couple months? We can always add at the next one, but
Have we moved at all towards working with the Housing Authority and Flagstaff on down payment assistance and things like this? Other things other than what we're handling here? Have we done anything in that regard?
so right now they don't have the bandwidth to help us with those. They're pretty stretched thin, but that is something we do anticipate coming out of the contract position or consulting firm that we plan on working with. That's on a directive to them to work on a program for us. We've been looking at some different jurisdictions, different organizations. There's some companies that actually have down payment assistance for government entities that we're trying to set up meetings with. I haven't heard back from them yet, but we are looking at different options that we could suggest to our HR to see if it's feasible for our municipality. But for the Flagstaff team, they're great for us. They're willing to answer questions that we have, but right now they just don't have the bandwidth to help us build a program for us. So we're looking at some other options, but that consulting firm that we're going to be getting that's one of their tasks, is determine how we can do those financial programs. So on some kind of good news, updates on our goals and our short-term goals and our long-term goals that were approved by council. Just wanted to, John and Nicole had asked us to start bringing forward that we can show that we are working on them. Some of them are already completed, just so people who, if they're tuning into our meetings for the first time, they're seeing what our goals are, what we're doing, and that we're actually doing what we said we're going to do. So for the Pursue Match funding for a full-time workforce housing facilitator, so we did get the request approved to use a consulting firm or a contract employee with a preference for a consulting firm. So we're going to try that first. If for some reason we don't actually have a lot of concerns that we won't get a consulting firm, but if we don't, we'll look in trying to find a contract employee for that. And then part of their purpose will also to be continually searching for grant funding as well. formalize a third-party stakeholder organization group. We did have our stakeholder meeting earlier this year. The second one, a follow-up one, will be planned alongside the housing needs assessment because that company and that housing needs assessment needs stakeholder input. So that'll be more information to come, but we did complete having the initial one. We haven't gotten to the point of that turning into an organization type yet, but hopefully as we keep going with the housing needs assessment, that will kind of organically form itself. We completed our role of the general plan housing element draft. So I believe public comment is still open. If you guys haven't gone and taken a look at the general plan, I would fully recommend it. They've got a great website where you can go to this cool virtual open house, look at comments that other people have made, add comments in. But we did work on that draft and get that to them to be included. So the two separate educational packets, you'll see that more in the policy. The nice thing is a lot of these are going to get hit by the policy, but that will be done by the consulting firm or the contract employee alongside working with our HR and our community development, public works, any departments that are going to be influential to creating fully competent packets for those who need them and want them. Research best financial program solutions for the city. So that's something that we just talked about. We are looking at different companies that provide that, as well as what other organizations and entities and municipalities are doing and how we could possibly do something similar to that. ADU, that came to council yesterday. Seemed like a while ago. And they had recommendations, so it's going to come back. Is it coming back at the next one?
Yeah, we did. I don't have my notes with me, but it's coming. I think it was January 25th.
I think so. So, okay.
It was January 28th.
Oh, 28th.
So January 28th, that'll be coming back with a couple of council, that'll be coming back to planning and zoning and then back to council with a couple of their recommendations.
It was basically addressing parking and access.
And the water meters, right?
Yeah.
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 Amber, we have to wrap up in 1 minute, unfortunately.
Okay, we have 1 minute. This, we're still in process of doing the policy. We are looking at that as part of the policy as well. We have a whole section on that, community outreach. We've done our fact sheet, standardized messaging, maintaining neighborhood integrity, consistency, all of that. But what we really are going to start with is that town hall, and with this housing needs assessment, getting out there more. And then that will also include you guys going out to your groups that you're part of, if it's Rotary clubs or whatnot, neighborhood block parties, just really getting the information out there and then wanting that feedback on the possible policy. Long-term goals, we're still working on some of those, but identifying the number of units needed will be determined by the housing needs assessment. Okay.
Yay. I just wanted to say good job, everybody, because I know this can be a little slow moving when we're working with city. It's just a government work of the government, right? We can't move as quickly as we can in business. So I want to acknowledge all of your work, but I especially want to acknowledge the staff because it's your boots on the ground that are making this possible. So my rough math, which might not be accurate, is more than half of our objectives have either been completed or in progress, which I'd say is pretty good for only being a year and a half in. So bravo, and meeting adjourned.